Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Success is a Choice podcasting network. We appreciate you joining us as usual. Good morning, good afternoon. Maybe it's good evening where you're at. We appreciate you checking us out on YouTube, Rumble, maybe your favorite podcasting audio stream. So thanks so much. We'll get right to our guest in just a moment. But first, I want to remind you that our podcast is made possible by the leadershipplaybook.com, theleadershipplaybook.com. Great teams have great teammates. Build a stronger culture, build better teammates, more positive leaders. And now you can get 25% off an annual membership by using CHOICE. Coupon code CHOICE, as in success is a choice, at theleadershipplaybook.com. Today's guest is a very special guest for us. Many of you know I'm a big Chick-fil-A fan. I love eating Chick-fil-A. I fool myself all the time into thinking it's healthy when it's really probably not very healthy. It's just better for you than a McDonald's or a Burger King. But anyways, I love Chick-fil-A. A lot of you love Chick-fil-A. We love taking our teams there. They always do a great job getting us our food very quickly and have great customer service. Well, today we have a former vice president of Chick-fil-A on the line. He was the former vice president for high performance leadership at Chick-fil-A. He's also a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and he just came out with his 12th book. Yes, 12th book, holding it right up here, Uncommon Greatness. So Mark Miller, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you today.
Well, yeah, let's, for those people that may not be familiar with you specifically, or maybe they've even read a book of yours or two and maybe didn't even realize that you had been at Chick-fil-A or what your whole career arc looked like. Give us kind of a 30,000 foot view, or give us a little bit of background with you. And I particularly want to know, I heard a little rumor that you actually quit at Chick-fil-A way back in the day, but a great American rebound story. You were able to overcome that and come back.
Thanks. I like the way you spun that. Yeah, I started selling chicken about 100 years ago, and I was a team member in one of the company's local restaurants, and I was awful in the restaurant. I've never been good with my hands. I was a bit slow, and it just was not the environment for me. And I tell people I made a strategic career choice, and not to confuse this with advice. I'm not suggesting anybody do what I did, but here's the way I rationalized it. Now, remember, this was 100 years ago, so I was just a kid. So chalk this up to the mind of a child. I said, I think I'm going to get fired every day when I go to work. So I think I'll quit, because it would be better to leave than to have to explain the rest of my life why I got fired at Chick-fil-A. So that was the decision making process, and that was about all of it. But I knew I needed a job, and so I went out and got a job. And about 6 months later, I got laid off, and I thought, shoot, I can't do what they do in the restaurant. I need a job. Maybe I could work at their corporate headquarters. Now, I know that doesn't make sense in any universe, but again, here we go. So I walked in, told the receptionist I wanted a job working in their warehouse because I knew they had a warehouse. So she told me to have a seat. Just a few minutes later, Truett Cathy, the CEO, the inventor of the chicken sandwich, came out and took me into his office to conduct that interview. Now, that didn't make sense to me then, but I later learned the only thing that made it a little more sensible was he only had 15 employees on his corporate staff. And so he was interviewing me to be number 16. And I tell people it was a combination of God's grace and lack of discernment on Truett's part that he gave me that job working in the warehouse, and I got to work in the mailroom as well. And that was 45 years ago. So it's been a fantastic ride.
Wow, over 40 years working at Chick-fil-A, amazing stuff. You've seen it, you've seen it grow into, I believe it's the third largest restaurant chain or behind McDonald's and Starbucks out there, but they're extremely successful, and they're not even open on Sunday. Crazy the way Chick-fil-A through the years has developed a business model. And so I want to break, some of that down and dive into that a little bit, because not everybody does what Chick-fil-A does. And yet Chick-fil-A is so successful. You talked about the hiring process, crazy. Truett Cathy is actually interviewing you. And in retrospect, that looks like it's a crazy thing, because this larger than life figure is interviewing you. But the hiring process is so crucial. Talk a little bit about how we need to find the right team members and what that process is like, because not every business goes through the same process with hiring, and yet the results are oftentimes very related to our hiring process.
Sure. Well, I would say it's a much more rigorous process today than it was 45 years ago. Let me get that out there right from the start. Yeah, it's just critical. I mean, you hit on it. Peter Drucker, the late management and leadership guru, who I believe was the best leadership thinker of the last 2,000 years. And he said it like this: when someone asks, what's the most important decision a leader makes? He said, who does what? And so we believe Drucker. We think it's the most important decision a leader makes, who does what. And so historically, there has just been a tremendous amount of rigor and patience in our process. We've lost many candidates over the years because we can't move at a pace that suits them. But we're going to move very deliberately and very thoroughly, and we're going to ask a lot of questions. And typically, you would talk to a lot of different people, and we're trying to make a really, really good decision. And I think it's the beginning of competitive advantage when you think about our staff. I would argue when you think about our restaurants, it is our competitive advantage, is the restaurant operator. Now, the restaurants, over 3,000 of them, are independently operated by these restaurant operators, and they employ over 400,000 team members over the course of a year. And so when we found over the years, when we get the right operator, they tend to get the right people, and we're able then to do things that our competition has not yet been able to figure out. And it really starts with the caliber of that leadership.
Well, that would make a lot of sense, because oftentimes, we talk all the time with sports teams and businesses. Even we say, hey, your culture is where your players are at, not where the coach is at necessarily. That the true culture is demonstrated or is on exhibit when you're not around.
Sure.
And so if the operator, though, is, in your case, the operator or the CEO or the coach is setting that vision, their true culture is going to be what they've been able to get their team members to take ownership in and all that. So it would make sense that you can't separate the operator and how you guys determine operators, how you select operators from team members, because they're going to be very correlated. And with that, the operator system is much different than most restaurants. It's very cheap to operate a franchise, or it's very cheap to it's only about $10,000, I believe, but less than 1% of applicants are selected, which would make sense, because then not everybody is capable of being a team member either. Mm-hmm. You have high expectations, high standards.
Well, sure. And I think it goes back, and it may have been one of Truett's greatest insights from my perspective. And here's the way he would talk about it. And I've heard him say this many, many, many times over the years. He said, you need two things for an organization or business to be successful. You got to have capital and management, is the way he said it. Okay. And if you look for both of those in one person, the pool gets really small, because it takes a lot of cash to do what we do. And it always has. But he said, if we could provide the cash, then the pool of men and women who have the talent is much, much larger. And so that has enabled us to create a very low barrier to entry, as you mentioned. And tens of thousands of people every year express interest in becoming a Chick-fil-A operator. So it enables us to raise the bar as we go looking for restaurant operators.
And you're not just finding people that are able to buy their way in. You know, so many
Right.
times people will get frustrated and bang their head against a wall because whatever they're trying to do, or you know, hey, that kid is playing more than my kid because their parents gave more money or whatever. You can't buy your way into operating a Chick-fil-A franchise
Right.
because the barrier entry, like you said, is so low. But then the standards of what we expect, and is it still true that you can only own or operate one franchise at a time?
Well, the deal is fundamentally, or I might say primarily, a one restaurant deal. However, we have a small percentage of restaurant operators that have two, and that's really driven by several things. One is the proximity. If the customer demand is such that we need another location very close to an existing location, and the operator is capable of operating two, and that's a judgment call, and we have to try to discern whether they can actually do that or not. So we do have some that have two, and then very few who have three. But again, it's driven by proximity and our really strategic bet on them that they can actually operate those three restaurants. But it's primarily a one leader, one restaurant proposition.
And operators are expected to essentially roll up their sleeves and get in, you know, and boots on the ground, serve, you know,
Yeah.
do like their team members do to a degree, and not just, you know, pay the money and then just reap all the benefits, but never be seen, which I think definitely sets Chick-fil-A apart. And it's one of those leadership principles that you're very fond of and you promote is just the service aspect.
Sure. Yeah. I'm still not convinced absentee leadership is a thing. I mean, it exists, but it's not a thing, right? It's real hard to lead without your presence.
Absolutely. Well, a few years ago, I was at a McDonald's, and you know, I'm doing some work on my laptop while I'm traveling, and in one booth away from me, they're interviewing a couple different people, and so it's the manager, the assistant manager, and one
Mhm.
kid comes in, and this manager says, "Well, I apologize, I lost your resume, can't seem to find your resume. Tell me a little bit about yourself." And they didn't go for more than 10 minutes. It was less than 10 minutes of an interview, and at the end, that manager said, "Well, it looks good. Sounds good. Can you start on Wednesday?" And the kid is like, "Yeah, I can start on Wednesday." And they're like, "All right, well, we'll call to get your schedule set up." And I'm thinking to myself, how, no wonder so many of these places have terrible customer service, or their culture is terrible because they don't put any thought into training people, or at least weeding people out, or hey, this is our
Mhm.
standards in our business to start with.
Right. Most important decision a leader makes is who does what. I mean, we believe Drucker on that, and so from a corporate perspective, we're going to put a very high priority on selection. Now, I will go back to something I said a moment ago. The restaurants are independently operated, and what you will find is a wide array of uh, systems and processes that operators have created for their restaurants, and that's fine. I mean, you know, they have to honor the operating and brand standards, but they can do selection any way they choose to do it.
What do you do when you have a team member, you know, whether it's at a Chick-fil-A, or in a sports or another business, or whatever it is, a team member that's pretty much disengaged. They just don't seem to be motivated or care. Are there some things that you would suggest that we as leaders do?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think the leader has to assume responsibility for that person's level of engagement. And I know that's a controversial comment in some circles. Now, that's not to say that you're accountable if somebody just has a bad day, but if they are uh, continuously and for a prolonged period of time disengaged, it's ultimately your responsibility because you get to decide if they stay on the team. But I don't want to go there first. I think you have to try to figure out what is the root cause. What is the root problem? And was there a time when they were more engaged what changed? I mean, I think you've got to put on your detective's cap. Now, if they were never engaged, then I still think you have to say, have we created the conditions to create engagement? We actually wrote a book about that called Win the Heart. I won't get into all that, but you need to assume responsibility. Not even if it's not you, the point leader, a leader needs to be accountable for the level of engagement of your people and work to lift that engagement through connection and affirmation and real responsibility. And there are any number of strategies you can bring to bear. But at the end of the day, you've got to make hard choices. If you have people who are chronically disengaged, they may just not be in the right role. I mean, you'd start there, but they may not need to be on your team. I operate with the premise that everyone can be wildly successful. However, not everyone can be successful in every organization or in every context. And if you say, hey, you're committed to excellence and you've got people who aren't, then they need to find a job where that's not a condition of employment or whatever it is you're trying to create. And I've seen this where people didn't want to be part of a team, and you're building a team-based organization. You see this, you work with a lot of sports celebrities and personalities. You see this every year. Pick your sport. It seems to be most prevalent in NFL and NBA, where there's always this star who can't stay on the team. Well, if you're building a team and somebody has talent but they don't want to be part of a team, then they need to go play somewhere else, because you can certainly undermine what you're trying to do by having folks who aren't a strategic fit or a cultural fit for what you're trying to build. But it starts with you accepting ownership and going to work to try and change it.
Yeah, and going back to what you said a little bit about leadership too, with when you have an operator or when you have your leaders that are rolling up their sleeves or serving, when they're jumping in and they're providing that example, it doesn't mean that all your team members are going to follow your lead exactly the way you want them to, but it does increase that possibility, as opposed to those leaders we've all seen, rules for thee, but not for me, or, do as I say, not as I do type stuff.
Yeah, people always watch the leader, and they're looking for several things. One is, do you care about me? Are you trustworthy? Right, because you don't ultimately follow somebody who's not trustworthy. And one way you erode or undermine that or destroy it completely is to say one thing and do another. People always watch the leader.
You were with Chick-fil-A for more than 40 years. Were there some things that you saw along the way where they adapted, they adjusted for the better? How did they evolve? Truett Cathley inventing the chicken sandwich, amazing. Glad he was put on earth to do that. But how did you see, what were some things that you saw them adjust to and evolve for the better through the years?
Wow. I mean, we could list hundreds and thousands of things, because I think for many, many decades, continuous improvement was actually one of our core values. We updated that probably a decade ago, and we felt like we wanted to kind of raise the bar. And now innovation is part of the cultural ethos that we're trying to create. But it's everything from waffle fries and nuggets and char grilled on the menu side. It's moving from malls to freestanding restaurants. It's drive-throughs. It's multi-lane drive-throughs. Even, this doesn't sound like an innovation today, but way back when we started taking credit cards, that was us adapting to the world. We weren't really excited about credit cards, but we said, hey, this is where the world's going. We're actually going to do that. And of course, the IT infrastructure that we have built over the years, the app. One of the reasons that there are probably a couple reasons I think we did so well during the pandemic. One is that local operator who I've already talked about. We had great leadership in those 3,000 restaurants. But another reason is the fact that we were working on an app before the pandemic. We were working to improve our drive-through before the pandemic. We were adapting. We were reinventing. One of the sayings I often refer to is, you need to dig your well before you're thirsty. There were organizations, that had not done some of those things, and they kind of missed the moment. They weren't ready with an app or a drive-through or with other on-site leadership, and they took a beating during the pandemic. So I think there are many examples, because it's part of who the organization is.
Well, a lot of people listening to this are coaches or have taken groups of people to a Chick-fil-A before. And, I'm no exception. We would take a team, they would all order individually and then I would pay at the end. And there were so many times we would go to a Chick-fil-A, every player, every athlete would have their food when I came up to pay, which is absolutely amazing customer service. Obviously there would be once in a while that wouldn't happen, but time and time again, they had just their systems and processes in place. They got those people food where you go to another restaurant and, everyone orders, everyone sits down and you still don't have the food, and then they bring it out on trays and expect you to figure it out. But just the Chick-fil-A overall environment and the way they take pride in having high standards or being excellent is something definitely to hang your hat on.
Well, thanks. I mean, I'm not officially part of the organization anymore, but I can testify they're still working to make it better. We've got 3,000 folks on our corporate staff that are all trying to help those restaurant operators be wildly successful and take care of the customers at an even higher and higher level as we move into the future. So thanks for the recognition, and we're going to keep trying to make it better.
Well, when we come back here in just a moment, we will talk to Mark about some of his books and a little bit more leadership philosophy. But I want to remind each of you that if you're looking for some professional development, free professional development, if you're a leader, educator, teacher, administrator, coach, we have free weekly webinars. These are live sessions. They go for about an hour, live sessions. Check them out, different topics. And you can even get a recording if you're not able to make it, if life happens, or if you have a class at that time. Check them out, freeleadershipworkshop.com, freeleadershipworkshop.com. Mark, we mentioned that you have written 12 books, or your 12th book just came out, Uncommon Greatness. So outside of the 12th book that just came out, which, your newest book is always your favorite. What was your favorite before Uncommon Greatness came out? What we got to pin you down. What's that favorite child of yours?
Yeah, I'm not even sure I can answer that. That wouldn't be right to the kids. But here's the deal. Each of the books that we've done was in an attempt to help leaders meet an emerging challenge or even to anticipate a future challenge that we might have a point of view on it. That's how we ended up with a book on culture. Several years back, we said, we think this is an emerging issue. And we went out and interviewed 6,000 people from 10 countries and spent millions of dollars and said, hey, here's a point of view that we think will serve leaders. We did the same thing on teams, although we worked on it much longer. We did the same thing on leadership effectiveness. I will say this, it's probably not my favorite, but I think the number one challenge leaders are facing globally is what we call quicksand. It's a toxic mix. It can be comprised of any number of things: busyness, distractions, complexity, fear, fatigue, success. So we wrote a book. We went to work trying to figure out how to improve leadership effectiveness. We ended up publishing that under the title of Smart Leadership. And somebody asked me, they said, is this book going to teach me how to lead? I said, absolutely not. This is for men and women who know how to lead, but they also acknowledge they're not leading to their full potential. And we went to work trying to figure out why is that the case in so many situations. And we said, hey, it's about the quicksand. And I'll just say one more thing about that. We naively spent about a month thinking, how can we remove the quicksand? And we finally abandoned that. You can't remove the quicksand. But we then began to study leaders who had been able to get out of the quicksand, or leaders who acknowledged its existence but had nothing to do with it. And so, given the success is a choice branding here, again, I won't get into this deeply, but we realize that there are 4 choices that leaders make that help them get out of the quicksand. And that's what that book is about. And so maybe not my favorite, but it's the one book that I would say is probably applicable to 95% of the leaders in the world, maybe 100% if you say you may not be in quicksand, but you know somebody who is, because every leader knows another leader who's in quicksand.
And you can check out Mark's books at www.leadeveryday.com. You can check out his books. Well, the very first book I ever read of Mark Miller's was this book called The Secret that you co-authored with Ken Blanchard.
Mm-hmm.
And you've had a lot of great insights over the years. But this book was what I liked about this book. Yeah, it was a leadership book, but it was a fictional book. It was a story. So when you write, and a lot of our audience is familiar with John Gordon books, Patrick Lencioni books, things like that. I've written a couple fictional books as well. But when you're writing a fictional book compared to a nonfiction book, let's say, Mark, is one easier than the other? Is one more enjoyable to you than the other? Talk a little bit about the compare and contrast those two types of books.
Okay, well, so let me reframe just 2 degrees. Those fictional books, I would call them creative nonfiction, because we will spend millions of dollars doing the research. So they're a fictional story based on truth. So we discover the truth, and then we write the story around it. So I did do 8 or 9 of those. And now I'm doing more traditional books. Obviously, there's a market for both, and I understand the value and merit of both. But in my case, one of the challenges we faced, and you may have encountered this with your books, my publisher would never let me put a lot of tactics in the book. They said that you destroy the story. That's not what fables are for. In fact, he said specifically to me, you're not writing a field guide here. He made me take 75% of the content out of one of my early manuscripts. And it just broke my heart, because I said, leaders need this. And so we started writing field guides, which is fine. And I don't mind writing field guides. But we woke up one day and realized that 95% of people that buy the books don't get the field guide. So therefore, they don't have the tactics. And so I changed publishers a few years ago, and he said, hey, I'd like you to consider doing a traditional book. And I said, how do you feel about tactics? And he said, the more, the better. And so I'm now including a lot of the content in my more recent books that would have shown up in a field guide. So to answer your specific question, I think it takes a little more rigor for us, because the research might be the same in both genres. But when you write a traditional book, of course, you've got to come up with case studies and third-party data sources. In addition to the data that you may have collected, you've got to do end notes and other things. And it's a little more unwieldy for me. And of course, the word count is more than double. So it's probably a little harder for me to write a traditional book than it is a fable.
Yeah, it varies for each person. But what I do know is that I wish I'd paid more attention back in high school English class.
Yeah, my editors wish that I had as well.
Yeah, all those times of sitting in there with my buddies in the back of the classroom saying, when are we going to need to know this junk? Well, I learned that when I started writing a book.
Yeah.
So your brand new book just came out. You mentioned that you write, this is your 12th book. You've mentioned that you write a lot of books kind of based on what's needed out there, or what you're passionate about at that moment, or what people are, I mentioned needing. Uncommon Greatness, 5 Fundamentals to Transform Your Leadership. What was kind of the impetus for wanting to write this book, or where did you see the need out there for this book?
Well, and this need, interestingly enough, emerged within Chick-fil-A. Now, what we have found is what our leaders are struggling with, and their challenges tend to be universally true. I mean, that first book's now in 25 languages. I mean, truth travels. So just to say that, but to answer your question specifically, this book was something Chick-fil-A said we needed to put together, because that first book, The Secret, is about the skills of leadership. And we, at that time, introduced the picture of an iceberg. We said, that's our picture of leadership. Skills are the 10% above, and characters the 90% below. We chose to do that first book on skills. Well, it wasn't too long after that, people said, hey, we need you to write about the leadership character and the heart piece. So I wrote a second book called The Heart of Leadership. So several years ago, Chick-fil-A came to me and said, we've got a problem. And I said, okay, what great. I mean, we always have problems. Which one is it that you want me to be aware of? And they said, well, we've actually got people who've read one or the other of those two books. And so they have a truncated view of leadership. They say, can you put those into one book? And then, because I had a new publisher, he said, and we want to do that as a traditional book. Those first two books were fables. And so this was an opportunity to take work that we published almost 25 years ago, or we wrote it 25 years ago, published about 20 years ago, and refresh that. As I said, do it in a traditional leadership book format. We went ahead and did another data set of about 4,000 leaders, over 4,000 leaders from 6 countries, to help validate the current state of leadership in the world. Again, so that was why this book exists.
What's Uncommon Greatness? 5 fundamentals to transform your leadership. 5 fundamentals to transform your leadership. You can get that at leadeveryday.com. You can get it on Amazon. You'll definitely want to check that out. We're going to get you out on this last question, but it has 2 parts. A lot of us always wondering, what it's like behind closed doors sometimes, or what it's really like. But you were the 16th employee or corporate employee of Chick-fil-A. They've got 1 or 2 more now than they used to have, just a few more. But at corporate office, when you were there as the vice president, the first part of the question is, did you have to say my pleasure all the time when somebody said thank you behind closed doors at corporate? And number 2, did you just have Chick-fil-A every day for lunch, and it was just all you could eat buffet, and it was just so hard not to gain 1 million pounds a year?
All right, so let's start with that second question. Truett Cathy was a genius at many levels, but one of the things he started doing at least 45 years ago when I was on staff is he provided free lunch. And back in the day, I was the kid that went and picked it up. And to this day, the organization still feeds all of the staff a free lunch every day. And yes, Chick-fil-A is on the menu along with other items, and Chick-fil-A milkshakes. And so you have to be very careful. But yes, Truett is still providing free lunch. And I can't tell you how much business and how much community was built around those lunch tables over the last 45 years. And so, yes, a lot of free chicken. It's been wonderful. To your first question, it was our pleasure to say my pleasure.
Great answer to that question. Mark Miller, we appreciate your time. Absolutely. Great info. A lot of people are Chick-fil-A fans. A lot of people are leadership fans that listen and watch this podcast. So it's great when we can combine those together. Go out and check out Mark Miller's new book, Uncommon Greatness. You can also follow him at Mark Miller Leads on Twitter, and get us out on something you want us to have a takeaway for, or one last thing.
One last thing, just a way to maybe add some value. I'd like to give you all my cell number in case you've got questions. 678-612-8441.
You don't get that every day. You do not get that every day from a Wall Street Journal best-selling author and former vice president of Chick-fil-A. So thanks so much for that. Go ahead and hit him up. Don't be a stalker. Don't be crazy with that. But he wants to add value. So go ahead and take advantage of that. And hey, Mark, we definitely appreciate you and all the insights you've given us, not just here in the last few minutes, but your books and over the years, the people you've blessed. So thanks so much for that. And for everybody watching this, we appreciate this. Share the show with a friend, that loves leadership, that loves culture, or maybe just loves to eat chicken sandwiches. Share this with a friend. And, until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?